very much. And just a reminder, if you are going to play in the Tekken tournament or you want to hear more about them, please do donate and have a chat as well with Tom. I will now hand you over to the panel. We have Mr. Ian Smith who will be moderating for us tonight, and he's one of the best moderators around. We flew him in. I'm not sure where from, but I will hand over now to your panel, and I'll leave the rest down to your panel of experts.
Good evening, all the way from Bristol in southwest England. Welcome, guys. I'm Ian Smith. I'm the Integrity Commissioner of the Esports Integrity Coalition, which is, as it sounds, a global coalition of esports stakeholders united in combating match fixing, betting fraud and cheating in esports. I'm not here to talk about what we do. We're here to hear from a really, really good panel this evening on a range of issues related to betting on esports. What I'd like to do is ask each of them in turn to explain who they are, what their background in esports is briefly, so that we can set the scene. You know who you're hearing from. I'll do a very brief intro to kind of where we are with the betting scene generally, and then we'll launch into some questions. I'm going to leave plenty of time for audience questions at the end, but if you have a burning desire to ask something, please stick your hand up and I'll ignore you for a while, but eventually you'll get through. Please do that if you need to, but otherwise there'll be plenty of time at the end. So I'm going to start off with James Watson of Sportradar.
Thanks, Ian. So I'm James Watson, Head of Esports at Sportradar. We sit at the intersection between data, odds, that's the betting world, integrity, audiovisual content, harnessing all of that together to be a market leader in the esports space. My background in esports is quite simple and maybe a bit more boring than these guys around me. I was a fan for a long time of esports, a long time player. Originally pushed the idea internally that we should look at the esports stuff. Originally actually integrity products once upon a time. And that's where it led us to become one of the founding members and partners of ESIC as well. And from there the business has grown onto greater, bigger, better things, and here we are today.
Who was next on my list? Suraj Gasai from BlinkPool.
Hello. I'm Suraj. I'm one of the founders and also the CEO of BlinkPool. BlinkPool is the first UK-regulated esports-focused betting operator. In terms of what our company does, we gamify the entire viewing experience of an esports game by asking hyper-contextual questions directly relevant to what is going on in the game at that specific moment in time. And these quick-fire betting markets are open for about 15 to 45 seconds the entire way through the game. In terms of my background in esports, if I'm being completely honest, I was just a gamer. I am a bit of a noob. I did start one of the largest amateur Dota leagues in the UK, but professional background is completely different to the esports background. And after I saw the esports market growing and growing, and I thought, well, here's an opportunity for me to get involved and merge my markets experience and my gaming passion. I founded and started BlinkPool about 2 years ago, and we've grown from me and my co-founder out of my living room to a team of 15 in offices just down the road, and we're about to go into a very exciting time for the business.
Cheers, thanks. Toby, Digital Fuel.
Hi, my name's Toby. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Digital Fuel. We're a media business, a marketing business that's based here in London and based in Sydney and Hong Kong. We have come, my personal experience has come straight from the gaming and gambling world. I've been in the industry for well over 15, 16 years now, working for some of the major operators around the world. Mainly in the marketing space, but certainly understand the 360 understanding of the whole business and how it operates. My personal experiences and in gaming, and I'm going to sound very old here, is I remember snapping Quicksilver joysticks. Probably is well, you probably lot don't even remember those, but yes, esports was Decathlon really was the start of it all for me. We've got a lot of experience in the area, in so much as working with companies in the space, working with brands in the space, and a good understanding of where it's going and where it's been tracking towards betting as well. So that's me.
Thanks very much. And finally on the panel is Peter from Ultraplay.
Hello, I'm Peter from Ultraplay. I'm head of esports for Ultraplay, and I represent a company that's been involved with betting and betting platform provider for probably 6-7 years now. And as a passionate gamer, a few years ago, we've started offering odds on esports, and we're currently offering about pre-match odds on about 21 titles, esport titles, half of them with live odds as well. So I think we're pretty much deeply involved in esports as well, betting side of it.
Thanks,
That's
Peter.
pretty much.
Yep, great. Guys, just to set the scene on this as briefly as I possibly can, the one thing I have assumed tonight is a pretty in-depth esport knowledge, because I think all of us on the panel, including me, speak at a lot of conferences, and we have to start literally from ground level explaining what esports is. It's a pain in the neck. We've all wasted an awful lot of time bringing people up to speed. I'm pleased, I think, that we don't have to do that tonight, so I'm hoping that we get a little more depth, a little more substance to what we're talking about. And then if you've got basic level questions, ask someone else. When I was first asked to look at esports from an integrity threat point of view, one of the first things I did was look at the number of cash markets, because my background is in traditional sport, and I know that effectively the root of integrity issues, particularly on a match fixing or spot fixing front, is betting fraud. That's the basis of it. I mean, well over 90% of match fixing is driven by that. So my first question when I was asked to look at this was, well, what's the betting? At that stage, we're talking late 2015, I found on a reasonably in-depth search, 3 cash markets. Now, at that time, there were probably 30 or 40 skins betting markets, but I was interested in cash markets because, frankly, I didn't know what a skin was. So I didn't really look at that until a little bit later. When I did the same search about 2 weeks ago, I found 140 operators offering cash markets. So from early 2016 to mid-2017, I don't know what that is in percentage terms, but it's a hell of a lot. And all of the guys sitting here will know that that reflects their businesses and the growth of esport. And that's really why we're addressing this tonight. It's not only the number of operators, but also the depth and value of markets that's increasing more or less exponentially. And on top of that, I think one of the issues we have to consider in esports is the evolution of new games that come into the market. And I'm thinking at the moment, whilst esports betting is dominated by the Valve titles, Counter-Strike and Dota 2, there's obviously significant activity in League of Legends, followed by a reasonable amount of activity in Overwatch, and then the rest, so to speak. But Overwatch hasn't even launched a league yet. And last month it accounted for roughly 4% of betting on all of esport, and in the year to date about 8%. On top of that, most of you will have noticed the dramatic rise of PlayerUnknown Battleground from nowhere. Literally didn't exist 6 months ago. So we're looking at a volatile and phenomenally interesting market, and that's where I'm coming from in the questions tonight, and hopefully you'll find that interesting. So the first thing we're going to kick off with relates to those developments, and that is to ask the panel, and in no particular order, what their views on the reliability of esports data from a betting point of view is. What are we dealing with here? Because what we know is that it's not like cricket with 150 years worth of data and an unchanged game with millions and millions of data sets. What do you think? Is esports actually ready as a betting product? Is it reliable? Peter's got the microphone.
I've got the mic, so I'm going to start first. First of all, speaking out of a company that's covering most titles than anyone else, I should say that games are at really different level in terms of readiness for betting. If you talk about Valve games and Counter-Strike and Dota 2, obviously you've got all the stats and data needed to cover up. I mean, if you go down from top to bottom level, at the bottom level where some games are being offered, like people taking bets on, it's not ready for that yet. But on the other side, if you've got people asking to bet on those games, and an operator coming to you as a provider and saying, look, we've got these people coming asking they want to bet on that game, can you provide it? Obviously, if there's a demand for a product, you have to supply it. On the other hand, and I'm sure everyone else here would agree, some games are not ready to take on betting as part of their whole scene that they've been working on, and that's going to be a problem because that can harm the growth of the esports scene in those games compared to, like, everyone wants to be like Dota 2 and CSGO esports scene, but not everyone's there yet.
Maybe just to add a bit more specificity, is that a word?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, okay. So to add a bit more context to that maybe, the Valve games are fantastic for data. With Dota 2 you have this Valve public API that you can easily source historic data and statistics for pretty much any match you could ever want, including my own bad level matches. But any professional matches on there, including live stats, including whatever your dreams are and imagination stretches to, you can get the data. CSGO, quite similar, but it's a bit more protected, there's not a public API. And then there's this huge spectrum to other games where there's just no data. And any data that does exist, it's collected by people or it's collected by in-house technologies. You look at the Blizzard games in particular, they've historically always struggled with data. If you look at StarCraft as a historic game in this space, you would have thought that maybe at some point Blizzard would have built the option to add a data transaction or data flow to that game. No, it doesn't exist. And that's why some are also a little bit hesitant about what happens with Overwatch. Coming under the same publisher, do they build in this API? Do they build in this data flow? I'm also a little bit sceptical about that. Despite maybe hearing some rumours they are looking at that, who knows what they're thinking. In reality, they do hold the keys here. And then you look at even stronger fringe titles. FIFA, we were talking about FIFA just before the panel. It's a great flagship product for traditional sports that tap into the esports world, but they're struggling with something as simple as scheduling at the moment. Like, never mind talking about getting data from these matches, they don't even know when the games are being played. They shuffled around the tournament at the last minute and decided that it was going to be played, what was the date? In August at some point.
Yeah, at some point.
And how does that make the product ready for betting? I'd say certainly not. So there's like you say, there's a huge spectrum here.
I think from a betting operator point of view, it's an issue, but it's now really the wave of esports and esports betting is in full force, and it's only a matter of time when data providers or organisations will provide data and really be kind of forced into doing that. But I think it's really a problem, for operators to adapt and to build that product and to actually hang their hat on that product. And we've seen it in the past before, the likes of people sitting on this panel providing data and so forth. It will happen, and it will happen, I think, faster now than it's happened in the past. But it is still an issue, and the more data out there in any sport, any environment, the better. But you've only got to see what happened with in-play betting in betting. Once data was available, the product evolved. The pictures drove the product, and that will all start to happen. But yeah, it's only a matter of time in my book.
Do you mind just giving me a quick show of hands? How many people here watch traditional sports as well as esports? Alright, so quite a lot. Let's say 50%. I think that on one hand you have, the data is very difficult to get, at least via kind of traditional methods. But on the other hand, so what we've done is we've created computer vision technology that allows us to get data directly from the games, but you almost enter a situation where you have data paralysis, where you've got so much data coming at you, in comparison to traditional sports where they're just starting to kind of get catapult vests to track performance of players. So these are kind of vests that they put on players to track heart rates, performance during training, etc. Whereas in esports, to some degree, given the resolution of the data, if you have an API-independent solution, what you're able to see is tons of data, and actually you start to think, well, how the hell am I supposed to deal with this? Add to that how rapid these games develop, where the meta shifts left, right, and centre, and suddenly a game that used to be one way about 6 months ago has completely changed the next way. 6 months later, it actually may very well make a lot, not all, definitely not all, but a lot of your historical data redundant. And for us, to be completely honest, that's why we designed the betting mechanism that we did. We thought, well, there's absolutely no way that you're going to be able to price this accurately and give punters a price that they're happy with, at least for the markets that we offer, not necessarily all of them. And we wanted to create a system where users were effectively playing against each other, not us, and so effectively you're kind of crowdsourcing the information that allows punters to kind of enjoy themselves, kind of expressing their opinions on games which fundamentally change so frequently. So yeah, there's one side in terms of how accessible the data is, but to be completely honest, even if everybody could access the data, I still think pricing esports is very difficult in comparison to pricing traditional sports, as these guys will know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a good point. And it also brings us on to, particularly from what Toby said, the relationship with the IP owners. Because this is the major difference, as probably everyone in this room knows, between traditional sport and e-sport is nobody owns football, nobody owns tennis, nobody owns cricket. But sure as hell own League of Legends and Dota 2 and so on. So, and there's also, of course, different level of IP owner in the tournament organisers, because we've also got to deal with DreamHack, MLG, Gfinity, or anybody else putting on a tournament. So how does your relationship, or what's your ideal relationship with the IP holders in esports? How does it affect your operation as a betting operator? Shall we start? We'll start with Suraj, actually.
Well, I mean, how does it affect our relationship? The fact of the matter is we built our computer vision algorithms specifically so we didn't have to deal with that relationship. I hope that as the market matures and as the kind of publishers start to see the value add of betting operators, I think up until now it has been a very kind of I don't know. It's not been a very cooperative kind of relationship. Effectively, the largest operators were skin operators who are not really kind of giving the game publishers a lot of value. But I think as you move towards a slightly more sophisticated market where you're starting to see money from betting operators pour into the scene and develop the scene, I think in the long term, IP owners will start to see, well, actually, if we open up and if we work with them, I mean, we'll be happy to pay for these data feeds, you know. That would be an ideal situation, but I do think at the moment it's a very uncooperative relationship. That said, you have like the tournament organisers. Some are cooperative, some aren't, etc. But I think an ideal scenario would be game publishers recognising the value in their data, recognising the value in betting operators and what they add to their games, assuming betting operators are adding value to the games, and then basically there being a simple transactional commercial relationship between the two. It would save us a lot of work on our computer vision algorithms, and it would save, I mean, it would ultimately allow them to realise a bit more value.
I'm just going to add quickly something that we have to understand that we're dealing with a lot of different companies here with very different approach to betting. I mean, we have to understand that if we're talking about esports in general, you probably talk about 10 different companies. Some of them are supportive in a way, some of them are completely against betting on their games. Something that we were talking earlier about, that they say betting's never going to exist on our game. I mean, they can't stop it, but obviously they can put some hurdles which we have to overcome in one way or another. So the bottom line is that if we sit down and talk about it, I'm sure there's a benefit there for everyone. Us as a data provider, game titles, as their game titles gonna grow, and so I don't see why not. But I don't think we're at this stage yet where everyone understands what we're dealing with. So that's.
Yeah, and nothing really too much to add on. I mean, echoing what they say, an ideal situation is we have an exclusive relationship with all of the game publishers in the world. There you go, that's the cloud vision. But realistically, a lot of these guys are predominantly US-based, US-driven companies. They don't have the same betting experience as we have here in Western Europe. They're generally not open to the concept because of maybe a tarnished brush in some cases, but also just because of a fundamental lack of understanding of the market. The best use case of that was with Rocket League, the game publisher Psyonix. Unicorn, as an esports specialist bookmaker, come out and announce with the press release, oh, we're going to be offering betting lines on Rocket League. And then Psyonix come out with a press release the day after saying, we don't support that. But ultimately, as you say, what can they do to stop it? It's a completely open market. These games exist as competitions, the same as any other sport, and yeah, the market's free to decide and behave how it wishes. But I certainly think there has to be at some point some acknowledgement from these, like I say, generally US-facing companies that this space does exist. Betting on their games will happen, it's inevitable, but if they can take proper measures to maybe control that gambling in a concerted way, maybe partner up with some specific people like yourself, Ian, as well in that mix, they can make a much better benefit out of it.
Yeah, I can probably add to that. I think I see it as two sides. I see it as, people talk about fixed odds betting, which is what we're all used to certainly in the UK and most of the world. And when you look at fixed odds betting, yeah, it has data feeds that you can look at pre-match in play or stats there to match up form from historical form. But there's a lot of disruption in this area, and because it's fully digital, it's open to disruption, and there's many ways around certain things of collecting data, building products like we're hearing today, and sports books. So there's two ways of looking at the disruption and the disruptive companies that are out there doing stuff, and then there's do we apply it to the real world of what we're used to in betting. For me, when I look back at poker, when it went online as an example, there was a massive area as such as land-based poker players didn't trust online websites. Oh, they're all fixed, they're rigging our games, and and I don't know this data, that data. Oh, we've heard this before. But a community came together, there was a trust element applied to that community, and then what happened from there was there was bodies set up to control some of this. And that's what's got to happen, that will happen. I can tell you my experience. I had a conversation 5 years ago with a major publisher, beginning with R, so I won't say the name because I'm on camera. And I remember sitting opposite this person and saying to them, I've got an idea about betting in esports, and they laughed at me. And they actually said to me in so many words, we'd never get involved in that, but if we do, we'll buy it and we'll own it. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Bearing in mind they did have the money, and they have got the money now. So you never know. It's now happened 5 years on. It is world. It is a world phenomenon in different parts of the world. There are companies out there offering markets and all sorts, as we all know. So you never know. One of these big publishers may get involved in some shape or form. But yeah, it's going to happen.
Thanks, guys. We're going to shift a little bit to an area that really involves marketing and looking at the betting industry more broadly, and that is to look at the overlap with traditional sports bettors. So, esports is presented as a betting product in multiple different ways. and obviously we know that there are specialist esport operators, but there's also operators in the market who cover traditional sports. And I'm sure it's very interesting, and a challenge to them is how do you convert? You know, what's the overlap? And as part of that, to look at really how do we market, how do betting operators, I shouldn't say we, I'm not one, to market to the esports community, because they are a community with unique characteristics. And you know, the ultimate goal of every betting operator, which is how do you create new clients? So here you have this new constituency. How do you turn them from being esports fans into esports bettors? Toby, you're starting.
Yeah, I'll take that one. I think the industry now with esports and trying to, there's a lot of talk about the audience, the size of it, the money, and everything that's involved in it. And when you look from a gambling point of view, again, there are different areas, and you know, the disruptive ones and the conventional sports betting or bookmakers. With the conventional bookmakers, there's lots of elements that we all know is they're not educated, they see it as another product, they don't see it as a standalone product, they don't be able to communicate, there's data issues. And then you've got companies like Unicorn and other companies out there that have gone, you know, full on. Betway is another one that's gone slightly full on. But you've really got to go back to what is a conventional bookmakers or gambling company's real interest. There's two things. There's one, do they get a margin on it? Do they make money? You know, if they're trading football and they're earning 3% on turnover, if they're lucky, you know, there are some operators that I certainly work with that trade, you know, in the double digits on esports and are successful at that in certain markets. So that's a major attraction. You know, the volume might not be high, but the margin's high. That's their number one. The other part is, where do they go with it? You know, if I'm a conventional bookmaker and I went from a retail outlet to a telephone betting outlet to this thing in the online world popped up, now we're all mobile, and then I've got multiple products, casino, bingo, poker, blah, blah, blah. I'm acquiring customers cheap through the methods of sports betting as an example, and I'm cross-selling them over to higher value products, higher margin products such as casino, such as, you know, was poker, bingo, so forth, slots. So it's where do these companies go if you're a disruptive, you know, esports company? You know, where do you go? I mean, the products that are out there are high margin. You know, they've designed them from the ground upwards. So that's really where I see it fitting. It's okay, you might, if you apply the logic of a fixed odds sports betting company acquiring customers at a low cost per acquisition, as we call it, and then trying to cross-sell them. Great. If you're seeing esports as a way to get to the millennial audience, as a cheaper way to get to them, cross-selling them, great. If you're a disruptive company, you've got to have a totally different strategy. But we see in certain areas, and we work with several companies, as I say, we see for the big brands and the sports betting companies that are out there, the majority of revenue that they make from esports is cross-selling into gaming products, i.e. casino and so forth. But don't get me wrong, there are some that do make a good margin in esports and do well with it. But you know, they've still not found their way properly. So it's exciting to see new products pop up in the esports world, and there's excitement still with skins betting and things like that. You know, there's hopefully going to be some more disruption around there and legalise it and actually make it fundamentally good.
Yeah, I think from an operator point of view, there's again a huge spectrum of attitudes towards esports betting. If you take approximately 500 global bookmakers, like Ian said, 100 plus of those are already offering esports in some form. That's 400 that are just kind of ignoring things at the moment. Of those 100, you could maybe count on one hand the number that actually know what they're doing. And the others are taking some sort of product service from a third party, or they're just copying from somebody else. They're just involved in esports because it's a hype factor. They know they have to try and secure some of this audience, that's their primary goal, but they don't actually know how to go about that. That's one of the real hurdles. We've had so many client discussions where a new client comes on board, they plug esports into the sport tree, just like any other sport, and just hope that this newfound audience tunes in, starts betting, and they start seeing huge cash turnover from it. And it's just frankly not going to happen. There are some that are making a success out of that, and that's either early adopters, or it's just Goliath companies that are just benefiting from huge underlying natural turnover. But yeah, generally the most success we see is either that dedicated brand style, dedicated portal, treating esports fans a bit different. I don't want to say making them feel special because it's degrading, but giving a kind of different experience that these guys are used to. Something as simple as separating League of Legends from Dota. It sounds so trivial, but those two fan bases couldn't be further apart on the spectrum. I don't know many people that tune in to watch both game titles. Maybe if you're a Fnatic employee, you would. I certainly don't. I'm more of a Dota than a League fan, even though Dota's not my main game. And others are probably completely different. However, your normal bookmaker, high street bookmaker, they have esports just in their section, and just find your game, good luck. It just doesn't cut the mustard.
I think we should look at it in two different cases. First of all, you've got the sports bettors, traditional sports bettors, that you're trying to convert betting on esports, which is really hard, close to impossible. Because first of all, those type of bettors, they already got plenty of matches, markets to bet on, and it's hardly to actually ask them to watch something else that they completely have no idea what it's about. So these are the hard people to transfer. On the other hand, you've got esport bettors who most of them are generation X, Y, Z, millennials, whatever you want to call it, who've most of the time have no experience in betting so far, and these are probably the easier type of people that you can convert, because obviously they've never touched betting before, and when they start betting on esports, it's much easier to convert them to traditional sports in that sense, because obviously once they learn the basics of betting, that's the gap between esports and sports is not that big. So from that perspective, you can see people like getting the young crowd, and that's why a lot of operators are coming to us and saying, look, we've got our typical customer is like 30 plus, 40 plus, how do you convert them to esports? Well, it doesn't really work. The other way around, if you're able to get the right marketing structures in place and you attract the young crowd, the young generations into esports betting, that's your way into traditional sports betting. That's what I think it's easier to go that way rather than the other way around.
I mean, I think I have a very, my view was when we first quit our jobs, we would have loved to have been a B2B operator, these guys. And we very quickly realised that the bookies did not understand the esports. They didn't understand the games, let alone the audience, and they kind of lumped them all together. And for me, when I was kind of many moons ago graduating, I had looked at going into the betting industry as opposed to the financial industry. And fact of the matter is, I didn't watch football, I didn't watch rugby, I didn't watch cricket either, believe it or not. And I definitely didn't watch horse racing or dog racing. And so I thought, well, if there was a job there as esports odds compiler, I would have jumped at it. It wouldn't have said esports odds compiler, it would have preferably said Dota odds compiler. And I think that ultimately you're talking to and so that's when we decided, well, screw it. I know the audience, I am the audience, I know what I like to watch, I know what I'd love to bet on, and we decided to shift focus and say, screw it, we'll become a consumer-facing operator. And ultimately, I think you're looking at an audience who has a huge kind of self-selection bias to familiarise themselves with extremely complex games, as long as the product's good enough, as long as it's got a big enough value proposition, as long as it's fun enough to play. And that's when we thought, well, actually, we think that the main differentiating factor is going to be product. How good is what you're putting in front of them? And that's, I think, actually similar to what a lot of these guys are saying in terms of, no, it's not an esports tab, go find your way around. It's like, mate, I don't want to have to look for my stuff. Serve me the product that I want to see. Like, even if you look at skin betting sites, I think that they had it. I think that they were onto a thing, you know? You don't have billion-dollar markets growing under you, like everybody's nose, without any of your external parties recognizing. And what? The two biggest operators were Dota 2 Lounge and CSGO Lounge. You're not going to ask any of them, oh, how are you going to cross-sell? Well, I know the people who are going to be cross-sold are going to be the people who play both of these games and watch both of these games. There's no freaking chance that I'm going to get a Dota guy betting on a CSGO game if he doesn't play. Because he's not going to have a clue. So almost coming back to the original question that you asked just before, in terms of kind of the relationships between game operators, I think a lot of the game operators are struggling with betting operators because for them, their primary business model is playership. And the spectatorship was a secondary, unforeseen byproduct of, I mean, I'm pretty sure they didn't expect it to happen. Now, people are kind of trying to design games, kind of, oh, let's keep spectatorship in mind, let's try and make it an esport. But fact of the matter is, I think it's just something that happened the other way around, and so it coming all the way back to it. I think usually it's serve them a good product, have a strong enough value proposition, and you'll see them convert. And I mean, betting is one of the many vices of humans, right? If people want to drink, people want to bet. It's a fun thing to do, as long as you can do it well, you know?
Yeah, I'm going to jump past a section here, which is kind of my, because we're running out of time, and I'm hoping that you guys have some questions as well. So I'm not going to delve into the whole kind of integrity piece. And we've already discussed, and Peter's mentioned the fact that markets are going further and further down into an area that I would describe as unsafe from an integrity point of view, and certainly from a data reliability point of view. But I'm going to jump to ask each of the panel briefly, before we open up to questions, to make a prediction for the future of betting on esports. And then we'll open it up to questions. So you got the mic, Sarah. You make the first prediction.
It's going to go up. No. I'm incentivized to say that. No, but I think betting on esports, I think it has a place. But I think what you don't want is a situation where betting becomes the only thing that is being served to, in terms of the spectatorship, the only partner that is there. I think there needs to be a healthy balance, because fact of the matter is that your esports audience are competitive in and of themselves. To some degree, there is an element of betting on yourself, even amongst the professional players right now, where, say for Dota, a majority of their package could very well be coming from tournament winnings. Effectively, I think in an ideal world, what would happen is the games become professionalized more, players are getting paid more in general, the quality of life is better, and then betting sits on as a satellite industry to the core activity. And I think as long as a healthy balance is maintained, I think betting on, it's a spectator activity. It doesn't matter if it's gladiators in the Colosseum, football players in the stadium right now. If people are watching something, betting will occur. But I don't think, I think there is a risk of too much betting kind of being net negative for the broader industry, and thus it imploding. Don't try and not put that on YouTube.
There we go. Peter.
Well, I think esports betting is going to definitely branch out from traditional sports betting, because at some point you were facing having so many different games to bet on, like game titles, that it would be impossible to put them up on a traditional sports book and expect people to find their way around and bet. And obviously it's going to grow, and it's going to grow quite big. At least I hope so. So I think it's going to have its own space in the betting world. And what I really, really hope is that the esports betting sort of industry is going to use the traditional sports industry mistakes that have done throughout the last, sports betting has been there for 100 years, probably more. I really hope that we're not going to do those same mistakes again, and that we're going to learn from them, because so far we've avoided some, but we've definitely encountered same story from traditional sports as with integrity and some other stuff. So I really hope we're going to learn from those mistakes made in sports, and we're going to kind of shift forward. That's what I think.
Yeah, I think it would be crazy to make any kind of long-term predictions because, who knows? 6 months ago, I wouldn't have thought that a 100-person battle royale game would have had a $300,000 tournament. But, that's life. So, especially in the short term, I think this is going to become a key disruptor in the traditional betting space. I think we're at a kind of tipping point now where it's going to become more irregular not to offer esports than it is to offer it. It's going to become something that operators have to be part of, otherwise they're going to start losing customers very quickly. You look at the generation as they're growing older and growing into this betting mature age, I really fear for the companies who rely on the really old school traditional sports to underpin their sportsbook. Guys that are still seeing high traction through horse racing, greyhound racing, these are the two that get touted a lot because they're betting sports and because they're very old school in their mentality. For those guys, it's going to be a real challenge to harness this power. On a more specific scale, I think if we're looking at individual game titles, I think it's inevitable we're going to see more and more titles offered for betting, for sure. But I don't think we're going to see anything really mount a challenge towards the big three, League of Legends, Dota and Counter-Strike. I think Overwatch will have a good run, and the Overwatch League could well be the one to crack it. But realistically, these three games are so far ahead of the rest of the market at the moment, it's going to take an awful lot to overturn that.
I suppose in many ways I see it growing. I see it growing big. I think that there's now, if you're comparing with you're saying, well, there's a lot of talk about betting, the word betting. I mean, for me, esports is really about gambling, and there's different areas of the gambling sector, gaming, sports betting, and there's fixed odds betting and tote betting, and all these different areas of betting. But it's about gambling for me. I think esports will now have a massive play in gambling. I think that you've seen it still today. The big sports betting companies or gambling companies make mistakes with products that come along, like lottery betting as an example, and then all of a sudden, well, that never take off, and boom, it goes. Esports will be the gamification side of it, which will be similar to slot machines and games, casino games, and that will grow in its own way. You'll still have some underground stuff happening, but it's now gambling. You will have people betting peer-to-peer. That will be massive. You will have people using cryptocurrencies to do transactions. That will be big. You'll have consoles getting into the gaming area, gambling area in some shape or form, and that's happening. That's in the background. That's happening. So it's going to be big. It will be big. It'll be more personal. It'll be more. It'll be fully digital. There'll be companies that step into it, which was similar when if we go back 100 years, we've mentioned it. When sports betting companies were on race courses, and they was all standing there doing the tic-tac-toe, and then all of a sudden they opened shops that are like funeral parlours. I was last week in Reims in France, and I went into an esports bar, and I was sitting there like in Vegas it's happening. I'm sitting there thinking, wouldn't it be nice if we could bet? Wouldn't it be nice? And but would most of us go into the William Hills, probably down the high street or the Ladbrokes here, and sit there and expect to see a League of Legends or Dota or a Counter-Strike game on the screen versus a dog race at Romford tonight? No. So I think that the distribution will be a very important factor in this, and I think everybody in this room plays a massive part in this, because there's a community that now needs to talk about betting, and don't talk about it in the dirty format of, I lost £20 down the bookies today. Talk it as in the competitiveness of gaming and gambling and sports. Talk about it as as what you want to see out of it, and that community voice will now drive gambling in esports, and hopefully we won't get any esports bars that look like funeral parlours, but that's how I see it.
Well, it's hard to imagine. We're clearly reaching the tolerance of the Monster Energy consumption pretty rapidly here.
I need a beer.
Shuttle. Guys, any questions? You just stuck your hand up when I asked for questions.
I was asking to throw a beer at Toby. I'll take the mic to anyone that has a question. So. I'll drag the mic down. Yeah, I'm portable. There's a mic here, Ian, you can share. You've had this one the whole time. Did you have a question?
Yeah, go first.
It's too many.
What mentioned at the end there of P2P, it's quite interesting. The only mention of P2P in the context of betting. So, a lot of what you're talking about is someone betting on other people.
Or betting between two parties, three
Yeah,
parties.
so anyone basic understanding of the law in the room will understand the Gambling Commission is looking closely at peer-to-peer betting in this industry. I'm interested to understand from all of you, including you, Ian, as to what you think. Do you think the games industry is willing and ready to have an element of what it does and what it wants to do regulated by the gambling regulators? Because that seems to be the direction they're travelling.
I'll take this one first because I've got the mic. The answer is yes. I personally think that it will happen. How it will happen is another format. But regulation's a massive thing in the gambling industry, as we all know. And there's very regulated jurisdictions, and then there's not very regulated jurisdictions. And I feel that the gambling industry will lobby for certain changes in peer-to-peer betting and certain products that go into that. The government will ultimately own tax out of it. Let's be honest, that's what it's about. And there will be lobbies and bodies set up to support it, and it is already happening. It's just ticking along, but it will happen. And then once you start to get the licensing of games involved, the money that could be produced in, let's say, FIFA as an example. If FIFA was able to, or EA was able to get the licensing revenue from TV, if it's put into TV or it's put into a console or any way like that, as soon as the money starts flowing and the licensing starts happening, that's when it will happen. And it is a matter of time. It will happen, in my opinion.
It's a very interesting question from the basis that the regulation of gambling broadly, but sports betting in particular, is about a century behind the practice of sports betting. And it's jurisdictionally confined to whatever jurisdiction the gambling regulator covers. So in America, you've got the Nevada Gaming Control Board. You have zero say about what happens outside of Nevada, one of 50 states, in addition to 100 tribal betting regulators. That's one country. Europe has 44 regulatory regimes covering gambling. So in France, it's conceivable already under their current law that the gaming activities you describe are in fact already regulated, and therefore any activity between two players in, let's say, Hearthstone as an easy example, it could effectively be covered by that law already. Now, that hasn't been enforced yet. My own view is that this is an area where the regulators need to be very careful and cautious in their approach, simply because at the moment, if in one country, taking France for an example, you said to Blizzard, you need a gambling license in order to sell and operate Hearthstone in France, my gut instinct is that their instinct would be to simply say, well, then we're not going to have Hearthstone in France, because the 3 or 4 million users, casual, non-spending users that we lose is not worth the hassle. And because they know it's the thin end of the wedge. And this is what I mean by gambling regulation being so far behind, is that currently there's no global effort to do something like that. And to affect a company like Riot or Blizzard or Valve, you need a more global effort than one regulator kind of going, hey guys, this has got to stop. So I think it's a long way off. I'm not saying that somebody won't try it, but I think that at the moment the publishers are more powerful than the regulators in this scenario. But there's a long way to go. Anyone else?
Do we have some more questions?
Right here. I just had a question about the most popular esports betting markets. What are people actually betting on right now? Is it match odds or is it various in-play markets?
Yeah, so from our client perspective, I can share a few things. I think historically, esports betting has been a predominantly pre-match product, maybe just as a result of the way that the fans have grown up around betting on the sport, maybe the experience from the skins betting sites and the lounge sites, which was all pre-match as well, and that's having a bearing. Also, the live product up until very recently hasn't been very good, so it's not a very intuitive fan experience, so that's also had a bearing. We're seeing that shift more and more with innovative products being brought into the market. I think we'll all vouch our own products on this panel, but we're all doing our part to try and push live as much as possible. Individual markets, I'd say a match winner, by far away the most popular market, but especially in Counter-Strike as a specific case, we're seeing some of our new betting markets become a bit more interesting. So we introduced round-by-round betting in CSGO, which is a bit different to what everyone else is doing, and immediately that becomes the second most bet market in our offer. Above all the stuff like handicaps and totals, round-by-round betting immediately shoots right up the tree. So yeah, and also that varies between games, and different games have different markets that are interesting, even varies between territories. I think we can probably agree that Counter-Strike's probably the biggest gambling title still globally, but that question is not the same in the Far East. In the Far East, in the Philippines, you'll see League of Legends and Dota 2 elevate, and Counter-Strike falls right off because of regional popularity, right? Counter-Strike's just not a popular title in the Far East, and that really comes through in the betting.
Well, first of all, we're going to break it into two, in pre-match and live. Obviously, you would expect in pre-match the main markets is match winner and handicaps and totals to be the most played markets. That's pretty easy. Of course, you've got a lot of game-specific markets that we offer, and we try to get that number of markets up and up. But again, in order to get someone to bet on those game-specific markets, you will be expecting these people to have a really profound knowledge of the game itself. While, as you know, on match winner, it's pretty straightforward what you bet on. Live betting, again, is something that we've put a lot of focus on, and to be honest, there you have match winner again is one of the most played markets, but because of the way it's working in live betting, in live terms, you will get a lot more bets on game-specific markets on live offerings. And that's mainly because of two things. First of all, match winner is a bet that you will place, and that should last until the game is finished. While in game-specific or on specific markets, you might get your bet settled within a minute, 30 seconds, or even less. So this shifts the whole purpose of offerings and the idea of having more markets, and especially markets that people gamers tend to understand, and they really, really like, first of all, because they can't see them somewhere else. So I think we have to look at it from two different perspectives.
Yeah. For me, it's a no-brainer. We ran our first test a few weeks ago, the first real money test. We have a free-to-play product, and our free-to-play product, it's easily over 95% of our money goes on our in-play hyper-contextual events. We ran our first real money test a few weeks back, and we have our pre-game markets, and then we have all of the other markets the whole way through the game, and we had just under 80% of our volume wagered on these in-play events. And these questions to an outsider would be absolutely ridiculous. I've had people say, what's a Rax? What's an Aegis? And yeah, it does require very game-specific knowledge, but in terms of straight-up volume, you're looking at just under 80% coming through in play if you're serving them good markets.
I think we've got time for one more, and then obviously if you catch these guys around, then you can pick their brains some more.
One question I've got, it was mentioned earlier, was about the occurrence of new titles on gaming. So you mentioned obviously traditional sports companies, they maybe don't understand esports, it's completely new to them. But surely then, every time even you guys as esports betting companies, a new title comes out, so was mentioned, PUBG, that arose very quickly. As soon as that happens, the new title that rise very quickly, your knowledge in that is actually very low. So I guess as kind of the esports experts in betting, when would either a traditional sports betting company or a specific esports one know when to enter a market in esports, given that if something rises very quickly, because it might be its first one advantage, go in, but given the knowledge at that point would be very low, when would you know to enter a market?
Yeah, this is exactly why we did what we did. We say, play against yourselves. We operate a market-based product. When we know it's the right time to move into a market is if there's a big enough audience. And in terms of what do we need to know, as long as we know what betting markets are interesting, we let the market price itself. Users are playing against each other. They are not playing against us. We do not make a commission from people losing. We just take a commission from people's winnings. And so effectively, I get what you're saying. I would not like to find myself sitting on, the computer end of those odds and having to try and price a completely new game where your punters are going to know a shit ton more than you. I mean, I know a lot about Dota. You ask me to price League of Legends, I'll be sitting there clueless. Not clueless, a little bit clueless. So for me, it's a function of audience and then betting markets, where we do offer a slightly different product.
I'll tell you a story with Overwatch when it came out, actually when the beta version came out. A lot of our traders were really keen on getting their hands on beta version of Overwatch to start playing it just for the sake of it. So what we did is actually we got them a few copies of the beta version so they start playing it. And usually how it works is that we try to break down the game to quantify the different variables in it before we actually offer odds on it. So what we did, we start from the beta version. There were a lot of changes when the final version came out. However, we had a head start, so we were able to start pricing it pretty much before everyone else. I mean, I don't know, I can't tell about different companies how they did it, but obviously we started from probably a week in after the final version was on.
Yeah, there's definitely elements of staffing up internally. We're both from fixed odds betting providing companies, so getting the right people on board with this expert knowledge is definitely a key criteria. I would never even think about asking one of my football traders to come and trade any sort of esports match. Not going to happen. We're maybe a bit more conservative than Peter's company. Our customers are always asking for 100% quality, accuracy, reliability, and sometimes we maybe wait a little bit before pushing products out to the market. I don't really have a problem with that. I'd rather wait till the game matures a little bit before we jump in. I do recognise there is a kind of maybe first mover advantage for things and getting ahead of the game. But equally, if you move first and you do it wrong, that's probably worse than waiting and doing it right. So take a different approach.
Just like to say thank you very much to our panel this evening. It was very insightful. Just a couple of things quickly from me on an admin perspective. After the panel, if you all stand up from your chairs and fold up the chairs and put them on a stand at the back, it makes the whole process a lot easier. Please refrain from hitting each other with chairs, because we don't have insurance of that. You can hit the panellists, yeah. He's just giving me approval for that. The pizza is coming at 8:30. This was kind of like an appetizer for betting on esports. So if you want to learn more about the 6 panels we're running in conjunction with Betting on Sports, the conference run by SBC in Kensington between the 12th and the 15th of September, then do come and grab us. We've got 6 panels covering integrity, the Vegas opportunity, data, bookmakers if they want to stand alone. We've got a legal pack, we have loads going on, looking at it all in a very much deeper perspective. Reminder, I've got 8 sign-up spots left for Tekken as well, so come and grab me. I don't care how bad you are. Come up, give it a go, why not? And a reminder again, Special Effects are our partner for the tournament, so drop them a donation and be friendly. Pizza's here in 25 minutes, I'll let you all go to the bar, I can see you're all dying for a drink. Thank you very much to Digital Fuel and Ultraplay for our